Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Got a piece of mail the other day which reminded me it's census time. Every 10 years, the United States government conducts a census, and that is actually something that's called for in the Constitution. Something I talk about quite a bit here on Lehto's Law. And I've had people contact me and say, Steve, this census thing is crazy. They ask all kinds of intrusive questions. I don't want to answer it. And I've had quite a few people tell me that they, by no uncertain terms, will not answer the census. Or if they do, they will simply answer the one question: how many people live in your house? They go, I'm going to give them a number, and that's it. Well, here's the deal, okay? The census has been done going back to time immemorial. And by that I mean back to the beginning of the United States. The census serves many functions, not the least of which is it's how they apportion certain things at the federal level. And so based on the census, one of the things they figure out is, how many representatives your state gets in Washington, D.C. Check it out. I'm wearing a timely shirt. How often does that happen? Almost never. So I would urge you to fill out the census, but not the least of which is, as your attorney, I've got to tell you, and by the way, I'm not your attorney, but as the attorney on camera, the law requires you to. It requires you to. In fact, I did a video entitled, You Are Required to Answer the Census. The title may have been a little more clickbaity than that, but that's the point. The law requires you to answer the census. So I've had people say, but Steve, the law requires you to answer the census. It does not require you to actually answer any of these nosy little questions they might ask. Well, first of all, the law requires you to answer the census. And this isn't that big of a deal. People say, Steve, the problem is if you say this isn't a big of a deal, then pretty soon it's a slippery slope. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. Don't tell me it's a slippery slope now and it wasn't 150 years ago. Okay? So I got the letter. It says resident. Okay? And it's addressed to me at my address. It says, Dear resident, this is your invitation to respond to the 2020 census. And of course, that's a euphemism because you're required to respond to it. We need your help to count everyone in the United States by providing basic information about all adults, children, and babies living or staying at this address. And of course, I'm not sure why babies and children are two different groups. I would have thought that babies are children. But results from the 2020 census will be used to direct billions of dollars in federal funds to local communities for schools, roads, and other public services. And that's true. Help your community prepare to meet transportation and emergency readiness needs. That's probably true. Determine the number of seats each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives and your political representation at all levels of government. And that's true also. The Census Bureau is using the internet to securely collect your information. This is a beautiful thing. I logged on last night and I did this in under 5 minutes. I actually asked myself, I wonder how long this is going to take. And it was done so fast, I actually thought, wow, I've had consumer surveys from Verizon that took twice as long. And even then, I've had some I bailed halfway through. I'm like, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. This census online was so fast, it was a joke. And it's not like you've got anything better to do right now. You're at home. You're probably in front of a computer. If you got this piece of mail that says, Shape Your Future, Start Here, United States Census 2020. If you got this in the mail, open it up. Take the 5 minutes and do this. It's your civic duty. The Census Bureau is using the internet to securely collect your information. Responding online helps us conserve natural resources. We don't have to kill as many trees. Save taxpayer money and process data more efficiently. If you are unable to complete your 2020 census questionnaire online, we will send you a paper questionnaire in a few weeks for you to complete and mail back. The census is so important that your response is required by law. Oh, imagine that. And your answers are kept completely confidential, which is also a law, that they keep the answers confidential. If you do not respond, we will need to send a Census Bureau interviewer to your home to collect your answers in person. Yes, they'll come knock on your door. I've had people proudly tell me, Steve, I refuse to send that junk back. They send someone to my door, and I give them an earful. Wow, you must be proud. If you need help completing your 2020 census questionnaire, please call a toll-free number and they give you one. Thank you for your prompt response. Stephen D. Dillingham, Director. And that has enclosures. And then along with the enclosures is a bunch of frequently asked questions such as, what is the census? Am I required to respond to the census? And it says, yes, you're required by law to respond. We are conducting the census under the authority of Title 13 U.S. Code, Sections 141, 193, and 221. And by the way, people say U.S. code. That's not law. Yes, it is. How long will my 2020 census questionnaire take? The Census Bureau estimates that completing the questionnaire will take 10 minutes on average, and that is a high estimate. I would say closer to 5. If you have comments regarding this burden estimate or any other aspect of this burden, you may write to Paperwork Reduction Project at the U.S. Census Bureau and a bunch of answers. So just in case you're curious now, if you've got problems with the burden of a 5-minute online survey, you can write a letter to the Paperwork Reduction Project. And yes, I'll admit, this is the crowning achievement of this document. They give you the address where you can write to complain about the burden, and you're going to write to, on paper, the Paperwork Reduction Project. It's almost like art. How do I respond? Complete your census questionnaire online. You will need a 12-digit census ID found on the other side, and there is, in fact, a 12-digit census ID which says your census ID is, and there's a 12-digit thing there. How will the Census Bureau use the information? By law, the Census Bureau can only use your responses to produce statistics. So they ask you your name. They're not going to attach your name to something and say, oh, by the way, here's what this guy's doing. Are my answers confidential and private? Yes, the Census Bureau is required by law to protect your information. The Census Bureau is not permitted to publicly release your responses in a way that could identify you or your household. All web data submissions are encrypted in order to protect your privacy. Title 13 of the U.S. Code protects the confidentiality of all your information. Violating the confidentiality of a respondent is a federal crime with serious penalties, including a federal prison sentence of up to 5 years and a fine of up to $250,000 or both. And then they actually say if you want more information about how they protect your information, visit the website at census.gov. But in case you're curious, the information that they quote-unquote need to protect, they did ask me my name. Now, I expect that makes sense because they send this letter out addressed to resident at address. So they ask my name, and that's one way they can confirm that I'm not filling out 2 census answers at 2 different locations. But again, they're not going to attach my name to the statistics or the data. They had me confirm the address, so they mailed it to an address, and they had me confirm that address. You can imagine that if someone got the wrong piece of mail sent to their house and didn't catch that the address was wrong, well, this will catch it. They did ask me my age, and I think it's okay for the government to ask you your age as part of the data that they collect, because one of the things that the government has to do is respond to needs within its population. I'm talking about the population of the United States. The government knows how many people there are. It needs to know how old they are. Among other things, to calculate when Social Security runs out. I'm not kidding. I mean, that's the kind of thing you need to know the age. They did ask for sex. And by that, I'm an old school guy to refer to that as gender, but it does ask if you're male or female. It did ask for race. And I was a little surprised because it asks if you are Hispanic, and it has a bunch of different classifications. And then it says, or if not, are you, and it's like, are you white, and so on. And then under white, it actually has a box where you can fill in your ancestry. So I got to fill in Finnish. Interesting thing about that, though, is you wonder, like, again, why are they doing that? Well, once in a while, you'll see interesting data that they do where they'll crunch the numbers and they'll say, it's interesting because I know that at one point in time, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan had the highest concentration of Finns outside of Finland. And many of those people have spread out, so many of my people, my relatives, and I live in Lower Michigan. But, if you did this census 60 years ago, my ancestors were all in the UP. And you can learn stuff about how people travel. Now, I know that some people are saying, Steve, that's a little bit beyond the scope of what the government's supposed to be doing with the census data. Well, the Constitution grants the government the right to do the census. And if you don't like the fact that the census asks that question in particular, complain to your congressperson or your senator, because those are the people who could then lean on the Census Bureau and say, guys, stop asking this question or that question because it makes one of my constituents nervous. And then they asked, how many people live at these premises? Okay, so I'm filling it out, and it says, counting yourself, How many people live at these premises? So I put in a whole number. And then it asks, do you stay, I think it asks something to the effect of, do you stay anywhere else? In other words, is there a possibility you might get double counted? So let's suppose you actually had, you live at your parents' house, but occasionally you spend half the year at school. Not right now, you're not at school, but So depends on where people are when the census hits them. Some people may have gotten this before they came home from school and filled it out and said, yeah, I'm living in a dorm on a campus, or I'm living in a rental house in Ann Arbor. And then they come home and their parents go, oh, I'm doing a census. I count heads and I include that person. And of course, they would get double counted that way. So the census would ask that question. And like I said, that's it. Done. Goes, when you're done, click here. Understand that once you click, it's gone. So you can't go back and correct it, fill it out, redo it. It's, And I was startled at how easy it was to do, how painless it was to do. Didn't involve any math. Didn't have to go look anything up. It was all simple questions I knew the answers to. And it was all pretty much anything that people could figure out by simply walking around, just kind of looking around the neighborhood and go, I think that's how many people live in that house. That's how many people live in that house. But, I know people out there who are really, really averse, they get upset at government intrusion. And the government is much more intrusive in other ways. Your tax return, besides the fact it's more painful than the census, asks a lot more nosy questions about you, if you think about it, than what the census asks. Once every 10 years. Like I said, I think it does a good thing. I think the data they gather is pretty useful. And I can tell you that, I'll put it up on the screen for the fun of it. I've done research using old census data, stuff that's more than 70 or 80 years old. And I'll put up on screen a census sheet just so you can see what they look like back in the old days, back when the people used to literally go door to door, knock on the door, talk to you, go next door, knock on that door, talk to them. So that would be a little more intrusive to me, to have a person standing there on your stoop looking inside your house. How many you got back over there? How many you got back over there? And by the way, they used to routinely ask questions such as, what do you do for a living? What language do you speak? Where were you born? And so I've seen much more intrusive questions in the past. This year, like I said, piece of cake. So I strongly encourage you to fill out the census with a smile, because it'll give you something to do for 5 minutes while you're sitting at home with nothing better to do. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. With every mistake, we must surely be learning.